Welcome to the Midrash Says Out Loud. This week we will be learning the Midrash Parasha Chukat. I hope this channel will open your mind to the great teachings of the sages and deepen your connection to the Torah. Remember to like, share, and subscribe as we journey through the Midrash each week. Before we begin, we invite you to settle in for the drive or sit in your comfortable chair and relax as you listen to what the Midrash says. Out loud. Chukat. Torah laws are beyond our understanding. Generally, the mitzvot of the Torah belong in one of three categories: testimonies. If a mitzvah testifies to a historical event or to some aspect of our emunah, it is termed ny testimony. Examples are the mitzvah to observe Shabbat, which attests to our belief that the Almighty created the world in 6 days; to observe the Yamim Tovim, because they commemorate Yetziat Mitzrayim; the mitzvot of tzitzit and tefillin, which demonstrate our belief in Hashem's rulership. Civil laws. Mishpatim are divine laws that promulgate the safety and survival of human society. They include, for example, the prohibition against theft and murder. Divine ordinances. In the category of hak, plural, hukim, fall those mitzvot, whose purposes or meanings are not necessarily understood by human intelligence. There are numerous examples of hukim, but the Midrash lists 4 about which the Torah explicitly states, it is a hak. Since they contain apparently contradictory elements, they are liable to be ridiculed by the rational thinker. The Torah therefore advises the Jew to tell himself, it is a hak, I have no right to question it. The 4 are: 1. Yibam, a Jew, who marries his brother's wife during his brother's lifetime or even after the latter's death, incurs the karet penalty, provided his brother had children. But if his brother's widow is childless, it is a mitzvah to marry her, yibum. Since logic may find this turnabout difficult to accept, the pasuk emphasizes, and you shall guard my hukim, Vayikra 18:26. 2. Shatnez. The Torah forbids the wearing of a garment that contains a mixture of wool and linen. However, it is permissible to wear a linen garment to which woolen tzitzit are attached. Lest we question this exception, the Torah declares concerning the mitzvah of Shatnez, you shall keep my hukim, Vayikra 19:19. 3. Sa'ir la Azazel, the he-goat to Azazel. The he-goat, sent to its death as part of the Yom Kippur service, purified the community of Israel of its sins while defiling the agent who took it away. This law is therefore called an eternal hak, Vayikra 16:29. 4. Para Aduma, the Red Heifer. The ashes of the Para Aduma purify a Jew who is tamai, while rendering tamai anyone involved in preparing them. Since this also defies logic, the Torah introduces the subject with the words, this is the hak of the Torah, 19:2. We must accept the mitzvah as a divine ordinance. Nevertheless, hukim are not laws without reasons. Rather, their logic is divine. The greatest among our people were able to understand some of them. Thus, the rationale behind the laws of the Para Aduma were divinely revealed to Moshe. On the other hand, King Shlomo, who researched the reasons behind the mitzvot and found explanations for all the others, professed that this mitzvah was incomprehensible. Shlomo discovered why for beasts the shoshay must cut both the windpipe and esophagus, while for birds cutting only one of these organs suffices, and fish need not be ritually slaughtered at all. However, he confessed, I thought I would get wisdom, but the understanding of the mitzvah of Para Aduma is far from me. Koheles 7:23. To appreciate his words fully, let us explore the scope and depth of Shlomo's knowledge. And God gave Shlomo very much wisdom and understanding and breadth of knowledge like the sand that is on the seashore. Melachim 5:9. This verse implies that Shlomo's wisdom was equal to the collective wisdom of the Jewish people who were as many as the sand on the seashore. The capacity of his intellect was superior to that of every other person, and therefore he could grasp what was on one's mind. Consequently, his judgment was true even in cases where the facts were obscure, as is shown by the following story. 3 Jewish merchants were on their journey together when Shabbat approached. They decided to bury their money in a certain spot, rest until after Shabbat, dig it up, and continue on their way. In the dark of the night, while his companions were sleeping, one of them stealthily approached the hiding place, dug up the money, and concealed it elsewhere. Looking for their money after Shabbat, the merchants realized that it had disappeared. Since no one else knew of the secret hiding place, one of them must have stolen the treasure. But which one? Each accused the next, saying, "You are the thief." Unable to determine which of them was guilty, they decided to travel to Yerushalayim to submit the case to Shlomo. Shlomo carefully listened to their account and ordered them to return on the following day. When they returned to court, the king declared, "I know that you are all shrewd merchants. Before judging your case, I wish to hear your opinion about a different problem that was presented to me." The 3 listened attentively as Shlomo related the following incident. A boy and a girl grew up in the same neighborhood and promised each other not to marry anyone without the other's consent. Later, they moved and lost sight of each other. When the girl was of marriageable age, she became engaged to a young man in her new town. However, she had not forgotten her childhood promise. When the time of the wedding drew near, she sold her personal belongings in order to raise cash and set out on a journey to her birthplace to seek out her former neighbor. She traveled to his town, found him, and explained that she was someone else's bride. She requested that he release her and instead accept the money she had raised. The young man appreciated the pains she had taken to be true to her promise. Although he found it difficult, he told her that she was free to marry her bridegroom. He declined the money she offered him, and she departed in peace. The solitary return trip was just as dangerous for the young girl as had been her journey away from home. When she was riding through a deserted neighborhood, an old man pounced upon her from behind a bush, robbed her of her money, and threatened that he would misuse her for his own purposes. "Please listen to me," the girl entreated him. "You are an old man. Why should you bring this awesome guilt upon yourself shortly before being summoned before the eternal judge? Take my money, but let me return unmolested to my bridegroom." She related her story to him and concluded, "My childhood friend certainly had more difficulty in releasing me than you do, he to me. You, an old man, should learn from him to control yourself." Young and claimed a right, the robber was moved by her account. He did not harm her and restored her money. "Now," concluded Shlomo, "a mighty king has posed to me the following question. Who is the true hero of the story, the girl, the young man, or the robber? I wish to hear your views on the matter." "The girl is extraordinary," replied the first merchant. "Imagine undertaking a long and perilous journey just to fulfill her promise." "I admire the young man," remarked the second. "He acted nobly and unselfishly." "The robber's action is most striking," commented the third merchant. "After having both the girl and the money in his possession, he not only released the girl, but even returned the money." "Apprehend him," cried Shlomo. "All he thinks about is money." Even listening to this tale, in his heart he desired the girl's money. When he had an opportunity to take money for himself, he certainly did so. Arrest and whip him. The merchant was seized and immediately confessed his guilt. Shlomo was competent in all the sciences, surpassing his forebears. For example, his knowledge of animals was greater than that of Adam, who had named each species according to its essential characteristics. His understanding of astronomy surpassed that of Abraham, a master of that science. His expertise in statesmanship exceeded that of Yosef, himself a skilled legislator. He was also a better linguist than Yosef, who spoke 70 languages. Shlomo outshone the kings and nations of his time in all branches of science. Although the Egyptian kings were proud of their knowledge of astrology, Shlomo's competence was superior, as illustrated by the following incident. When Shlomo was about to build the Beit HaMikdash, he asked the Egyptian king Pharaoh Necho to send him artisans. Pharaoh requested his astrologers to divine which of his subjects were destined to die that year. He subsequently sent Shlomo a crew of ill-fated workers. However, as soon as the artisans from Egypt arrived, Shlomo became aware of their secret. He ordered that they be issued white shrouds and sent back to their homeland with a message to Pharaoh Necho. Apparently you lack shrouds to bury your dead. I am therefore sending you some for your workers. Shlomo's Torah wisdom was immense. It surpassed that of the entire generation of the wilderness, known as the generation of knowledge. He knew details of Torah that even Moshe did not know. Shlomo's greatness in Torah is apparent from the 3 wonderful Koheles and holy books he authored with Ruach HaKodesh Mishlai and Shir HaShirim, which were included in Tanakh. He also composed some of the Psalms in Tehillim. He endeared the Torah to the people, for he was able to illustrate the meaning of each halakha with as many as parables, and cite different reasons for any rabbinic ordinance. How profound, then, is the mitzvah of para aduma, if Shlomo, the wisest of all men, declared, I studied it and toiled to understand it, but it is far beyond my grasp. In truth, even those mitzvot of the Torah which seem understandable are hukim. Their true meaning and significance is far beyond man's intellect. The laws of para aduma, the Red Heifer. On the 1st of Nisan 2449, the Mishkan's last inauguration day, Hashem revealed to Moshe the laws regarding impure people who are expelled from the camp and the purity laws of the Kohanim. Hashem taught him how purification from the different types of impurities is achieved, either by immersion in a mikvah or in a live spring, and so on, as well as the sacrifices that consummate the purification procedure. When Hashem taught Moshe that a Jew becomes tamai by touching a dead body, Moshe questioned, how does he purify himself of this tumah? The Almighty did not answer his question, and Moshe's face darkened in grief and shame. There can be no greater pain for a Talmid Chacham, whose life goal is to perfect himself in Torah knowledge and performance, than to be denied the knowledge he seeks. Later that day, Hashem resumed the subject, explaining to Moshe and Aharon, if someone became defiled by contact with a corpse, he is to be sprinkled with a special mixture of water and ashes from a red heifer. The Almighty instructed them in the laws of the para aduma. The para aduma is purchased from the treasury of the Beit HaMikdash, from a fund containing the yearly half-shekel donations of individual Jews. To qualify as a para aduma, a cow must be at least 3, old enough to bear young. Years old. Its color must be completely red. Even 2 hairs of another color disqualify it. The animal is also disqualified if it was once harnessed to a yoke, even if it did not perform labor. Having searched everywhere for a completely red cow, the Sanhedrin was finally informed that such a cow was owned by a certain non-Jew. Delegates were sent to attempt to purchase it. The owner said, for a good price I am willing to sell the animal. Give me 400 gold pieces. You shall have them, the Hakamim promised. We will return with the money. They left to obtain the necessary funds from the Sanhedrin. Meanwhile, however, the non-Jew told to his friends about the prospective sale and discovered how rare and precious his animal was. When the delegates returned with the agreed-upon sum, the Gentile told them, I have changed my mind. I am not selling my cow. We are willing to pay a higher price, replied the Hakamim. Do you want another 5 gold pieces? I won't sell it, insisted the non-Jew. Take 10 more gold pieces, they offered. You cannot have it, he repeated. We will pay you 20 extra gold pieces, they said. Out of the question, he replied. The members of the Sanhedrin raised their offer until the man finally agreed to the sale for an additional 100 gold pieces. Some say an additional 1,000. The sages told him that they would return with the full amount and fetch the animal on the next day. After they had left, the Gentile laughingly said to a neighbor, Do you know why these Jews insisted upon purchasing this particular cow? They need it for their religious rites because it was never harnessed to a yoke. However, I will play a little trick on them. That night the Rasha took his red cow, harnessed it, and plowed with it. The next morning the Hakamim returned. Before paying, they examined the animal. They knew that a cow that was never harnessed to a yoke is recognizable by 2 criteria. 1. 2 certain hairs on its neck are straight while untouched by a yoke, but bend once a yoke is put upon the animal. 2. The eyes of an unyoked animal are steady. After it was yoked, they blink because The animal squints to see the yoke. This cow, they immediately realized, had the signs of a yoked animal. "Keep the cow," they told the Gentile. "We don't need it." Even this Rasha's blasphemous mouth acknowledged, "Blessed be he who chose this nation." Crestfallen at losing the fortune he could have gained, the Gentile strangled himself. The Kohen slaughters the cow outside the camp. During the years in the wilderness, it was slaughtered outside all 3 camps, and in the time of the Beit Hamikdash on the Mount of Olives, since this mountain is considered outside Yerushalayim. He gathers some of the heifer's blood in his left hand, dips his right index finger into it, and sprinkles it in the direction of the entrance of the Heichel, which he can see from the mountain. A fire is lit, and the Kohen supervises the cow's burning. With a red woolen string, he ties together a cedar stick and some hyssop and asks all present, "Is this a cedar stick?" "Yes," they reply. "Is this a cedar stick?" he asks a second and a third time. He receives affirmative replies to all 3 questions. He also asks 3 times, "Is this red wool?" and is answered each time in the affirmative. Why this ceremony? Not all types of hyssop, cedar, and red dye are kosher for the para aduma. Unless all species used meet halachic requirements, the entire mitzvah is invalid. Hence, the Kohen emphasizes that they are all in accord with the Torah commandments. While the cow is burning, the bundle containing the cedar stick and hyssop is cast into its carcass. The heifer's ashes are divided into 3 parts. One is placed in a certain section of the courtyard of the Beit Hamikdash, where it is preserved, in order to fulfill the mitzvah that the ashes of the para aduma must be kept for all generations. A second part is divided among the groups of Kohanim serving in the Mishkan, to be at hand for purifying a Kohen who became Tamai. The third part is placed in a spot on the Mount of Olives for the purification of the children of Israel. Whoever was involved in the preparation of the ashes, for example, the person who burned the cow, who cast the bundle into the fire, who gathered wood, who touched or carried the ashes, becomes tamei. In a utensil, the heifer's ashes are mixed with fresh spring water. The waters of the para aduma are sprinkled by someone who is himself pure from tumas hamei onto the Jew who purifies himself. He sprinkles him on the 3rd and 7th day of the individual's purification. Moreover, during the 7th day, the person being purified must immerse himself in a mikveh to consummate his purification. To this day, 9 red heifers have been burnt. The first was prepared by Elazar ben Aharon under Moshe's supervision on the 2nd of Nisan, 2449. Moshe directed the proper thoughts toward it, because Elazar did not understand its reasons. Some of the ashes of Moshe's para aduma were mixed with the ashes of each later one, since Moshe's heifer was the only one prepared with the proper thoughts. A blessing rested upon the portion of Moshe's ashes set aside for purification. They lasted until Ezra's time. Under Ezra's supervision, a second para aduma was burned, a third and a fourth under Shimon Hatzadik's guidance, and 2 more in the time of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. From then until the destruction of the second Beit Hamikdash, 3 further paros adumos were burnt. The 10th one will be prepared by Mashiach, may he come soon. Hints about the mitzvah of para aduma. Although the mitzvah of para aduma is unfathomable until the time of Mashiach, when Hashem will reveal to the Jewish people the reasons for all the mitzvot, including this one, and in particular, it is an unsolvable mystery how it purifies an impure person while defiling a pure one. The Torah gives us certain hints. One day the palace maid's little son, while playing, dirtied the spotless floor of the palace. "Where is this imp's mother?" cried the king. "Let her come here and clean up her son's mess." Similarly, the Almighty proclaimed, "Let the mother cow atone for the impurity created by the golden calf." Therefore, only a female is acceptable, as a para aduma, while for other sacrifices both male and female animals are eligible. What is the meaning of this Midrash? After Matan Torah, Hashem elevated the Jews above the power of the angel of death. Since they were no longer subject to death, the impurity associated with death disappeared from the community of Israel. However, with the sin of the golden calf, death and hence the impurity it produces returned to their midst. The Almighty therefore designated the cow as the calf's mother to purify the tumah caused by her son. The particulars of how this mitzvah rectifies the sin of the golden calf are beautifully expressed in a piyut, poem by Rabbi Elazar Hakalir. Recited in the morning prayers on the Shabbat, that the Parsha of Para Aduma is read, it begins, "We cannot express the grandeur of your year. Wonders we do not know the limits of your laws." By exchanging Hashem's glory for a calf, the Jews forfeited atonement. Let its mother, the cow, serve as an atonement. Their faces reddened from sin. Let he who is named bright and ruddy, the Almighty, Shir Hashirim 5, grant atonement. Through its red-faced mother, by humbling themselves before a defective image, their former defects returned. At Matan Torah, the Jews were healed of all their ailments, but when they made the golden calf, their defects returned. Let its mother that has no blemish come to sprinkle its waters at the Jewish nation that is termed beautiful and without a blemish. Shir Hashirim 4:7. By sacrificing to a calf, they rebelled and cast off the yoke of heaven. Let the law of its unyoked mother be put upon their shoulders as a yoke. By fulfilling God's decrees concerning the Para Aduma, they re-accept God's authority. For the golden calf's sake, they assembled around a Kohen, Aharon, who thereby incurred such heavenly wrath that God wished to destroy him. Devarim 9:20. Sin. Let its mother be given to a Kohen, thus atoning for the Kohens as the golden calf was burnt in fire, so shall its mother be. As it was crushed to dust, so shall she be reduced to dust and ashes. As the calf's dust was mixed with water, so shall the cow's dust and ashes be cast into the water. As 3,000 Jews fell because of the calf, so 3 different species, cedar wood, hyssop, and a red thread, shall perish in the fire of the heifer. As the golden calf defiled a pure people, so shall the Para Adama defile a pure person who touches it. As the golden calf's dust purified the people, Moshe forced the Jews to drink water mixed with its dust, thereby weeding out the sinners. So shall its mother purify an impure person. As the sin of the golden calf is preserved for all generations, so is the water of the heifer. Unless one pours out his heart like water, he is not truly purified by the sprinkling of the water. Why should man, likened to grass that withers, pride himself in relation to God, the burning fire? The following points also show the correspondence between the Para Aduma and the sin of the golden calf. Since all the men donated money for constructing the golden calf, they were all required to contribute toward the purchase of the Para Aduma. These monies came from the temple treasury, which was comprised of the annual half-shekel contribution of every Jew. Hashem commanded that the first Para Aduma be burnt by Aharon's son Elazar rather than by Aharon himself, because Aharon had participated in the Chet HaEgel. The enigma of the Para Aduma, why it simultaneously defiles and purifies, contains an important lesson. One of the philosophical mysteries is the coexistence of good and evil, happiness and tragedy, in this world. Why righteous men are exposed to excruciating suffering profoundly baffled even the greatest prophets. Unable to explain the contradictions of life, the heathen nations ascribed their origin to dual deities, one who brought blessing upon mankind, and the other evil. For this reason, the moderns claim that the universe has, chas v'shalom, no ruling power. The Torah, however, teaches us to believe in one source from which all events good and seeming evil alike emanate. The apparently contradictory elements of the mitzvah of Para Aduma teach us to ascribe the mystery of life to the limitations of our intellect. On a level that transcends our present understanding, all contradictions vanish. Their essence is one, a divine plan for our ultimate benefit. The mitzvah teaches that we must view all aspects of life with the very attitude we must adopt for the mitzvah itself, emunah. It is our minhag to read the Parsha of Para Aduma each year on the Shabbat before the month of Nisan. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, every impure Jew needed to purify himself in Nisan in order to offer the Korban Pesach. Therefore, the laws of purification were read just prior to the month of Nisan. Today, our reading the Parasha is accepted by Hashem as a partial substitute for fulfillment of the mitzvah, Toma Vedahara, some laws of ritual cleanliness. Each of the following groups can become tamai, impure, under certain conditions through contact with a person or animal which is tamai, foods, liquids, vessels, and garments. A Jewish person, we will now outline the basic Tama laws of the above groups. Foods. A food can become tamei only if the following two conditions were fulfilled. 1. It is no longer nourished by its branch or root. 2. It was previously touched by one of the following 7 liquids: wine, bee honey, olive oil, milk, dew, blood, or water. Provided these two conditions were met and the food later touches an unclean person or animal, such as an animal carcass, or the carcass of certain creeping animals, it becomes impure. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, if teruma or challah became defiled, the Kohen was no longer permitted to eat it. There were individuals who refrained from eating any tamai foods when possible, even if not sacred, so as to avoid errors or as an act of special kedusha. Liquids. If a liquid touches a tamei person or the carcass of an animal, it becomes tamei. Vessels and garments. Vessels and garments become tamei if touched by a tamei person or animal. Earthenware vessels, if their inside was touched. Metal or wooden vessels are purified by immersion in a mikvah. Earthenware dishes cannot be purified. A person. A Jewish person becomes tamei through the following. 1. By contact with, carrying, or being under the same roof with a dead person, organ, or limb of a dead body, or with a vessel that touched a human corpse. A person who became thus tamei is termed an av hatuma, a source of tumah. He is impure for 7 days and, in order to be purified, is sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day with the waters of the para and afterwards immerses himself in a mikvah. 2. Someone who comes in contact with an av hatuma becomes tamai, but his tumah is less severe. It lasts until the evening, and he is purified by immersion in a mikvah. This person is termed a rishon letama, a primary carrier of tumah. Miriam's passing and the disappearance of the well of Miriam. On the 10th of Nisan of the 40th year in the wilderness, a national tragedy occurred. When the Jews arrived in the wilderness of Tzin, Moshe's sister Miriam passed away. She was 125 years of age. Miriam had taught and guided the women just as Moshe and Aharon had the men. She was one of the 7 known prophetesses. Miriam passed away without pain. The Shekinah revealed itself to her, thus drawing her soul joyfully back to its source, Misas Neshika. The narrative of Miriam's death follows the laws of the Para-Aduma, although her passing occurred in the 40th year in the wilderness, while the Para-Aduma was burnt in the 2nd year. The Torah juxtaposed these two events to teach that the death of a tzaddik achieves atonement for the community of Yisrael, as do the waters of the Para-Aduma. As soon as Miriam passed away, Hashem caused the well of Miriam to disappear temporarily, so that the children of Israel would realize that their well of water had been supplied in Miriam's merit. Thus, appreciating her greatness, they would mourn this tzaddiket in a befitting manner. The generation of the wilderness received 3 gifts in the merits of its 3 great leaders. In Miriam's merit, a well; in Aharon's merit, clouds of glory; in Moshe's merit, the man. Why are the 3 leaders associated with these particular gifts? They personified the 3 pillars which uphold the world: Torah, Avodah, and the performance of kindliness. Moshe was the giver of Torah and its teacher par excellence. Therefore, in his merit, the Jews received the man, whose daily gift alleviated the necessity of earning a livelihood, and whose ingestion aided them in Torah study. Aharon personified Avodah. His devotion to the sacrificial service brought the Shekinah to the community of Israel. The clouds of glory were therefore provided in his merit, for they represented the Shekinah which dwelt with the Jewish people. Miriam excelled in the 3rd of the 3 fundamentals, kindliness. From her youth, she devoted herself to her people's welfare. Even as a small girl, she assisted her mother as a midwife, and she brought food to the poor. Because of her attribute of chesed, kindliness, Hashem provided the Jews with water, a vital necessity. How did the children of Israel receive water from the well of Miriam? This miraculous water-giving rock was always present in the wilderness with the children of Israel. When the people camped, it rested in a high place opposite the entrance of the Ohel Moed. Each of the 12 Nesiim approached it with his staff and scratched a line from the well to his tribe. Water flowed along the 12 lines to all the tribes, forming rivers between one tribe and another. Each river was so large that a woman who wished to visit a friend from a different tribe needed a boat if she didn't want to wet her feet. The water also encircled much of the camp. Wherever the Jews encamped, grass, trees, vines, figs, and pomegranates sprang up at its edge. The vines produced 7 differently flavored grapes. The children of Israel tasted in the water and plants produced by the well of Miriam the goodness of Olam Haba. They therefore later sang Shira about this wonderful well. After Miriam's demise, the well suddenly disappeared. Without drinking water for their wives and children, the children of Israel found themselves in acute distress. Moshe and Aharon, who were sitting in mourning for their sister, saw throngs of people nearing their tent. "What assembly is this?" Moshe inquired of Aharon. Replied Aharon, "Aren't the Jews descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who perform kindness like their forefathers? They are certainly coming to comfort us." "Aharon," Moshe reproved him, "can you not distinguish between an assembly for a noble and one for an ignoble aim? Had they approached in an orderly way with the elders in front, followed by the officers, over the thousands, over the hundreds, and so you would be right. But look at this tumultuous crowd." Moshe's words were instantly proved true. The disorganized and excited assembly that flocked into the tent began to complain bitterly about the lack of water. "Why should we suffer so much?" they queried. "You, Moshe, used to assert that we are punished because there are sinners among us who cause the Shekhinah to depart. Now, however, the men of the generation of the wilderness have passed away, and those of us who remained alive are worthy of entering Eretz Yisrael. Why should we, our children, and our cattle perish from thirst? The unending tests are too much for us to bear. Why did you not pray that Hashem bring us directly to Eretz Yisrael rather than leading us around in the desert for 40 years? We would have preferred to be consumed together with Korash's congregation or in the subsequent plague, rather than to die now of thirst. You are mourning for one person. Instead, you should mourn for all of us, because we have no water." Although the Jews in their agitation were ready to stone Moshe, and Aharon, Hashem did not hold their complaints against them. They uttered them out of pain of thirst, and Hashem does not hold someone culpable for his statements while he is in pain. Moshe and Aharon escaped from the angry crowds to the entrance of the Ohel Moed and fell upon their faces in prayer. The cloud of glory appeared, and Hashem reproved Moshe. "My children are suffering from thirst while you are engaged in mourning. Find the rock that was the well of Miriam, command it to give forth water, and invite the congregation and their beasts to drink." By Merivah, Moshe and Aharon sin at the waters of Merivah. Hashem said to Moshe, "The people will now witness a miracle that will sanctify my name. Assemble the tzaddikim and great people at the rock from which water flowed while Miriam was alive. Command it to provide the Jews with water once again. While standing with the holy congregation in front of the rock, teach them a halakha or Torah passage. Then command the rock to give forth water. The merit of the communal Torah study will cause it to produce water, as it did in Miriam's merit. Moreover, all those witnessing the miracle will learn the great lesson that if even a hard rock obediently becomes a well at Hashem's behest, we Jews are certainly obligated to obey Hashem with happiness and goodwill, and not because we feel compelled to serve him." Hashem had warned Moshe to bring only the tzaddikim to the rock, but Moshe, who wished everyone to see the miracle, assembled the entire congregation, from great to small, including even the Erev Rav. A miracle enabled all the people to stand directly before the rock, although the area was too small to contain everyone. Some among the Erev Rav were heard to scoff, "Who says Ben Amram will perform a true miracle? There must be a reason why he is determined to address a particular rock. Perhaps he knows that the rock contains moisture and can therefore produce water." Moshe used to be a shepherd, and is acquainted with different types of minerals. Let's see if he can perform this feat upon a rock of our own choosing. The derision of the scoffers made an impression upon the people, causing them to disperse in all directions. The head of each tribe lifted a stone and demanded, "Moshe, we want water from this rock." The Erev Rav proclaimed, "Unless you give us water from the rock of our choice, we want none at all." Moshe was extremely distressed. He had expected to study Torah together with a solemn assembly of Jews before the rock. They would then experience through the stunning miracle that their Torah study had the power to change the very laws of nature. Instead, he faced a crowd of scoffers who questioned whether a real miracle was about to take place. Moreover, Moshe realized that the Shekinah was absent. On the first occasion, when he was bidden to smite the rock in Rephidim, he had perceived the Shekinah. The people's mockery had caused the Shekinah to depart. Moshe was uncertain how to proceed. The atmosphere was not conducive to Torah study. How could he teach a people that rebelled against its teacher? And which rock should he choose? Should he ignore the people's demand and bring water from the true well of Miriam? If so, the Erev Rav would claim that he did not perform a genuine miracle. Or should he acquiesce to perform the miracle through a different rock? If so, he might be guilty of transgressing Hashem's commandment. Moreover, Hashem might judge the people, unworthy of receiving water from a different rock. Moshe decided that he must sharply reprimand the people for brazenly challenging their Rebbe. He addressed them sternly. "Hear now, you rebels and fools. Why do you think your understanding is greater than your teachers?" At the beginning of Moshe's career, the Almighty had warned him against becoming angry with the Jews. Moshe had always guarded himself carefully from anger, no matter how greatly he was provoked. However, now his rebuke, though spoken for the people's benefit, betrayed a slight degree of anger. Hashem did not forgive him for this. Why are the Jewish people likened to a nut, as it says, "I went down into the garden of nuts," Shir HaShirim 6:11. If someone attempts to climb a nut tree, he is likely to slip and fall because of its smooth, slippery bark. Similarly, the community of Israel's leaders are in a precarious position, because if they denounce the Jewish people in any way, they are punished. Because Moshe reproved the people by saying, "Listen now, you fools," he incurred death. Because Yeshayahu complained, "I dwell in the midst of a people with unclean lips." Yeshayahu 6:5. He was not saved from execution at the hands of King Menashe. This tragedy occurred in the following manner. Yeshayahu was charged with having uttered prophecies that contradicted Moshe's and was tried in King Menashe's court as a false prophet. "You prophesied," he was accused. "I saw Hashem sitting upon a throne high and exalted." Yeshayahu 6:1. "Although your master Moshe proclaimed, 'For a man cannot see me and live,' Shemot 33:20. How then do you dare to claim that you had a vision of Hashem on his throne?" Yeshayahu thought, "Even if I explain that my vision did not attain the level of clarity to which Moshe referred, they will not accept my defense, but rather they will execute me. I must save myself by different means." He pronounced the Shaim HaMeforash and was immediately concealed in a cedar tree. The executioners began to saw through the tree. When the saw reached Yeshayahu's mouth, the Shaim HaMeforash did not protect him because he had spoken Lashon Hara against the community of Yisrael. Thus, Yeshayahu was slain. When Eliyahu was zealous for Hashem and denounced the Jewish people, saying, "They have forsaken your covenant," the Almighty responded, "Go, anoint Elisha ben Shaphat as a prophet in your stead. Rather than accusing my sons, travel to the city of Damascus and accuse it." There were idolatrous temples in Damascus, and its inhabitants worshipped a different deity every day, except for one day a year, which they consecrated to all the deities. Rabbi Abahu and Reish Lakish were traveling to the city of Caesarea, and Rabbi Abahu commented to his colleague, "Rather than visiting that neighborhood, whose Jews blaspheme the Almighty, we ought to flee from there." Reish Lakish picked up sand from the ground, stuffed his mouth, and replied, "Hashem does not want a Jew to accuse the community of Yisrael." Moshe continued to reprove the people. Shall we bring forth water from a rock concerning which the Almighty gave no commandment? I swear, I will listen to Hashem and bring water from the rock which he commanded. Very Moshe commanded the rock to produce water. However, it did not obey. No miracle occurred. Thereafter, Moshe hit the rock. At that, blood began to stream from it. Why did the rock produce blood? The Almighty was warning Moshe urgently to change his course of action. He must address the people kindly, or else he would forfeit his life. However, Moshe failed to contemplate the sign's meaning sufficiently. Upon seeing the blood, the mockers immediately had their comment ready, jesting, "We shall all have to drink blood." Hashem told the rock, "You did your duty, now convert your blood into water." The rock obeyed, but only a few drops of water dripped from it. The scoffers exclaimed, "Ben Amram, apparently you have only sufficient water for our little babes." Moshe then smote the rock a second time. At that, water gushed forth, forming a deep stream that flooded the people and drowned the mockers. Moshe's blow simultaneously caused every single rock in the region to produce water. Thus the Almighty corrected the Chilul Hashem created by Moshe's course of action. Now it was obvious that the appearance of water was not a feat of Moshe, but a supernatural wonder, for only the Almighty could have turned all the rocks into water sources. Hashem decrees death in the wilderness upon Moshe and Aharon. The Almighty censured both Moshe and Aharon extremely, proclaiming, "You failed to believe in me and to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel by striking the rock. You rebelled against me by ignoring my commandment to teach the Jews Torah in front of the rock. Therefore, you shall not bring this generation into Eretz Yisrael. Rather, you will pass away in the wilderness with them." The deaths of Moshe and Aharon atoned for their sin, since death atones for the transgression of Chilul Hashem. Why did the Almighty punish Moshe and Aharon so severely? Moshe could justify each of his actions. He refused to bring forth water from the rock that the Jews had designated, lest he be guilty of disobeying Hashem's word. He smote the rock because his spoken word proved ineffective. He addressed the people as rebels and fools in order to rebuke them. The subtlety of his error is beyond our understanding. Moreover, Aharon, who was also included in the verdict, was apparently innocent of any of the sins enumerated by Hashem. He erred only in standing by silently while Moshe smote the rock. Indeed, Moshe argued with Hashem, "I am guilty, but how is Aharon?" Aharon, however, did not defend himself. Although he could have questioned the verdict, he remained silent, as when Nadav and Avihu were punished by death. In truth, Hashem was looking for a pretext, as it were, to cause Moshe and Aharon to die and be buried in the wilderness. Moshe, the Almighty comforted him. How would it look if you, the leader of the generation of the wilderness, were to bury the 600 men whom you brought out of Egypt, and then bring another generation to Eretz Yisrael? Instead, you will be interred with the generation you led, thereby assuring them a portion in the world to come. You will lead them into Eretz Yisrael in the time of Mashiach. The leader of each generation will be at its head in Olam Haba, Bava, Metzia 85b. A further reason for the strict punishment of Moshe and Aharon is explained in the next chapter. Moshe and Aharon's punishment provides a key to the Torah narratives. Had we read only the Torah words condemning Moshe and Aharon, "You did not believe in me to sanctify me in the presence of the children of Israel. You rebelled," and so on. But not the preceding events, we would assume that Hashem accused Moshe and Aharon of a capital crime, such as atheism or idolatry. In truth, Hashem's word were addressed to two supreme tzaddikim, whose every breath was devoted to the service of Hashem and to the Jewish people. They did not rebel against Hashem, but rather they committed a subtle error of some kind. Hashem condemned them extremely, because the greater and the closer to Hashem a person is, the less is he spared from blame. If we do not bear this principle in mind, we misjudge the individuals mentioned in Tanakh as well as the Jewish people. The severe criticism voiced on Moshe and Aharon is a typical example of Hashem's stern judgment of great people. Other examples bearing out this principle Our Avraham, whom God called my beloved one, was greatly criticized for 2 words which he carelessly uttered. When he asked, "How shall I know that my descendants will inherit Eretz Yisrael?" God replied, "You shall surely know that they will be strangers in the Egyptian exile." When Yaakov was angry with his wife Rachel for demanding children, the Almighty reproved him. "Is this how you answer a woman in distress? I swear your sons will have to humiliate themselves before her son." Hence the tribes were subjected to great humiliation at the hands of Yosef. Yosef said to the butler, "Please remember me," and mentioned to Pharaoh that he should release me from the dungeon. For these words, Yosef was punished with 2 additional years in prison, for Hashem did not wish him to request favors from an arrogant Egyptian official. Yosef was punished with death because he embalmed his father without divine permission, or according to other opinions, because he silently listened to his brothers calling his father, "your servant." David's wife Michal, who reproved David for dancing in public in front of the Aaron, was punished with death in childbirth. Because Hiskiyahu showed the Babylonian nobles the luchos in the Aaron, it was decreed that his descendants would be taken captives by the Babylonians. It is beneficial for the tzaddikim that the Almighty does not spare them in this world. Moshe and Aharon were fortunate that it was decreed upon them, "You must die." Why are the tzaddikim fortunate to be judged with severity in this world? As a result, their full, undiminished merits are preserved for the world to come, a world of eternal joy and bliss. The Torah concludes the subject of Moshe and Aharon's sin with the words, "These are the waters of Meribah," strife, termed so because the children of Yisrael quarreled with Hashem, and he was sanctified by them. 20:13. How was Hashem sanctified by the waters of Meribah? Moshe and Aharon's death penalty demonstrated that Hashem punishes even the greatest tzaddikim. This realization would strengthen everyone's fear of the Almighty. Edom refuses to let the Jews cross its land. Usually, if a person went into business with someone and lost all his money, he would refuse to have further dealings with his former partner. He might even refuse to see him. Moshe was different. Just having been told by Hashem that he had forfeited his life because of the Jewish people, he nevertheless continued to conduct their affairs with the greatest diligence. He did whatever he could to speed their entry into Eretz Yisrael, although he knew that he was thereby hastening his death. Thus, when the people arrived at the border of the land of Edom, that neighbors Eretz Canaan, Moshe asked its king for permission to cross Edom in order to bring the people to Eretz Yisrael on the most direct route. Moshe sent the following message to the king of Edom. "We both descend from Abraham, who was divinely foretold that his descendants would be strangers in a land that is not theirs. God's prophecy came true, for your forefather Esav moved to another country, while we spent many years of bitter suffering in Egypt. Finally, God sent a Redeemer because of our fervent prayers to him. The power of prayer is our special heritage." Moshe's mention of the Egyptian exile indicated that the Jews were entitled to the possession of Eretz Canaan, since God's prophecy clearly referred to them. However, he was not explicit, for fear that Edom might argue that Esav's firstborn right was taken away by his brother Yaakov. Moshe continued, "To reach our destination, we must cross your land. Please allow us to pass. You need not fear that you will thereby suffer any loss. On the contrary, you will profit. We will purchase food and water from you at a high price, although we have our own supplies. We are rich, having brought out great spoils from Egypt. We will cause you no damage. We will muzzle our animals and not let them graze in your fields. We will take whichever route through the land you suggest." The delegates of Edom, a nation of evil character, replied, "You are thorns in our eyes. If you dare to enter, we will wage war against you. Apparently you are proud of your legacy, your ability to pray. We too have a heritage, the sword, for Yitzhak told our ancestor Esav, 'You shall live by the sword.'" The children of Israel sent Edom a second message, but Edom, without replying, mobilized a powerful army. The Almighty forbade Moshe to wage war because the measure of Edom's sins was not yet full, and therefore its time to be destroyed had not yet arrived. As Moshe therefore instructed the Jews to detour around Edom and take a different route to Eretz Yisrael, The children of Israel sent a similar message to the king of Moab. Moab, too, refused to grant the Jews passage, and so they detoured around Moab also. Aharon passes away on Hor Hahar. The cloud of glory stayed several months in Kadesh, at the border of the land of Edom. Then it rose and led the children of Israel on a detour around the land of Edom. It came to a rest before the mountain of Hor Hahar. The name Hor Hahar means mountain of a mountain. It was actually one hill resting on top of another and resembled a small apple on top of a big one. Usually, the cloud of glory flattened all hills and mountains in the desert so that the children of Israel could travel on a smooth path. However, Hashem left 3 mountains standing: Har Sinai, for the giving of the Torah, Har Nevo, to serve as Moshe's burial place, Hor Hahar, to become Aharon's burial place. Hashem preserved these mountains also as a reminder that there had been many such hills in the desert. The Jews would then appreciate the Almighty's kindness in leveling the mountains for their sake. When they arrived at Hor Hahar, Hashem announced to Moshe, "Aharon will be gathered unto his people. His soul will join those of other tzaddikim in Olam Haba. Inform Aharon gently that he is about to depart from this world, because he sinned at my Meribah. His son Eleazar will succeed him as Kohen Gadol. One who leaves a son to take his place is considered as though he did not die." Hashem chose to reveal the news to Aharon through Moshe, rather than communicating it himself, explaining, as it were, "I am embarrassed to tell him." Upon receiving Hashem's orders, Moshe pleaded, "Master of the universe, can't Aharon remain alive on the east side of the Jordan?" "Impossible," replied the Almighty. "His staying alive prevents the children of Israel from entering the land. Do you wish him to live at this price?" Moshe still continued to pray. "Master of the universe," he implored the Almighty, "how can I say to my brother, 'Your time has come'?" Replied Hashem, "It is an honor for him that he is informed by none other than you. Tell him, 'How fortunate are you that I and your sons attend to you in your last hour? Who will take care of me when I am about to die? Moreover, your son will take you place and mine will not. Furthermore, Aharon will not die through the angel of death. When Aharon risked his life by burning Ketores in the midst of the people in order to halt the plague, I decreed that the angel of death would have no power over him. I myself will gather in his soul." When Moshe realized that God's decree was irrevocable, he obeyed without delay. The next morning, he accorded Aharon public honor. Rather than walking to the Ohel Moed in the usual formation, Aharon to the right, Eleazar to the left, the Nisiim flanking them on both sides, and the people behind them, Moshe told Aharon to walk in the center, where Moshe usually walked. The people wondered why Aharon was accorded special honor. They surmised that Aharon had been granted Ruach HaKodesh instead of Moshe. When the procession arrived at the Mishkan, Aharon wanted to enter to perform the daily morning service. "Wait," said Moshe. "Hashem commanded that you shall not perform the avoda today." "What has he commanded?" asked Aharon. "Let us ascend Hor Hahar and I shall tell you," replied Moshe. At the foot of the mount, Moshe ordered the Nisiim to wait. Only he, Aharon, and Eleazar ascended. Again, Aharon questioned, "What has Hashem commanded?" "My brother," Moshe cautiously introduced the subject, "are you aware of holding a deposit which the Almighty may want back?" "My brother Moshe," replied Aharon, "the entire Mishkan and its holy vessels are under my charge. Have I failed in the avodah?" Moshe tried a more direct approach. "Has the Almighty entrusted you with a light?" he asked Aharon. "Not only with one," replied Aharon. "All 7 lights of the menorah are my responsibility." "This is not what I meant," said Moshe. "Perhaps he entrusted you with something that resembles a light." "The soul of man is the candle of Hashem," Mishlai 27 replied Aharon. "Do you imply that my time to pass away has arrived?" "Yes," said Moshe, and placing his hands over his heart, he cried out, "My heart is pained within me, and the fears of death have fallen upon me." Tehillim 55:5. On top of the mountain a cave stood prepared, and in it a bed and a burning candle. Hashem instructed Moshe, transfer Aharon's priestly garments to his son Eleazar, who will succeed him as high priest. When Moshe heard this commandment, he did
not know how to go about it. It was forbidden to dress the Kohen Gadol in any other but the prescribed order, first the undergarments and then the outer ones. In order to dress Eleazar in the correct order, he would have to strip Aharon of all
his garments, even his undergarments. "Fear not," Hashem said to Moshe, "proceed and I shall do my part." The miracles which the Almighty performed for Aharon when he was about to die were greater than those during Aharon's entire life. Whenever Moshe removed one of Aharon's priestly robes, he found him clothed underneath with a corresponding heavenly garment, so that Aharon's body was never bared. After Moshe had removed all 8 high priestly garments, Aharon was wearing 8 corresponding celestial garments. Then Moshe told Aharon, "Lie down on the couch." Aharon did. "Close your eyes," Moshe ordered. Aharon closed them. "Spread out your feet," commanded Moshe. Aharon obeyed. The Shekinah descended, and Aharon's soul was drawn towards it with happiness and rejoicing, longingly returning to its source. Misas Neshika. Since the departure of the soul by Misas Neshika, a divine kiss, is a sublime and holy spectacle, Aharon's soul departed in seclusion in a cave. No one besides Moshe and Eleazar was permitted to observe the great scene. Moshe longingly exclaimed, "How fortunate the person who dies in this manner." Hashem later granted Moshe's wish to experience this death. The angel of death had no power over 6 tzaddikim, who passed away by a divine kiss: Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aharon, Miriam. The Almighty commanded Moshe and Eleazar, "Now leave the cave." As soon as they left, its entrance closed. When Moshe and Eleazar returned, the people could not comprehend what had happened. They had seen 3 people ascend the mountain, and now only 2 descended. All sorts of rumors and suspicions regarding Aharon's fate were aroused. "Where is Aharon?" Moshe was questioned. "He passed away," replied Moshe. This statement was met with total disbelief. The people threateningly said to Moshe, "Don't tell us that the angel of death had power over Aharon, who controlled him and hindered him from slaying Jews. Bring Aharon back immediately or we will stone you. We know your strict disposition. Aharon must have said or done something which you considered sinful, and you decreed the death penalty upon him." The false suspicion cast upon Moshe invited heavenly punishment. Immediately afterwards, the Jewish people were attacked by Amalek. Moshe prayed to Hashem to be cleared of suspicion. The Almighty commanded the angels to bring Aharon's coffin and show it to the people. They had a vision of Aharon's coffin floating in the air. Thereafter they accepted his death. The mourning for him was heavy. It lasted for 30 days and included all members of the nation, men, women, and children. The heavens too mourned. God and his heavenly hosts eulogized Aharon, proclaiming, "The Torah of truth was in his mouth and iniquity was not found on his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness." For the Kohen's, Aharon's lips kept knowledge, and they sought Torah from his mouth, for he was like an angel of the Lord of hosts. Malachi 2:6-7. Why was Aharon so greatly mourned? Aharon enjoyed great popularity because he loved peace and pursued peace. While walking through the camp, he would greet any Jew he met with a broad smile and warm words, even if that person was a Rasha. Immediately, anyone who had committed or was about to commit a sin thought, "Why did Aharon, the Kohen Gadol, the greatest dignitary of the community of Yisrael, greet me? Obviously, he thinks that I am a tzaddik." Embarrassed that his true character did not conform to the image perceived by Aharon, the person resolved to better his ways. Whenever Aharon heard that 2 Jews had quarreled, he visited one of them and said, "Do you know how sorry your former friend is that he is no longer on good terms with you? He sits at home beating his breast with his fist and rending his garments in regret about the rift between the 2 of you, but he is too embarrassed to tell you." Then Aharon visited the other party and told him the same. The next time the 2 met, they embraced, kissed each other, and were reunited. If Aharon heard of a friction between a husband and wife, he did not rest until he had reconciled them. If he was told about 2 parties who had an argument, he found a compromise to settle the matter. Aharon passed away at the age of 123 on the 1st of Av, 2487. The community of Israel had been shielded by the clouds of glory in his merit. With his death, they disappeared. After Aharon's death, the Amalekim attack the community of Israel in the guise of Canaanim. The Jewish people's enemies soon heard that after Aharon's death, the Jewish camp was no longer surrounded by clouds of glory. There were reports that the children of Israel were now traveling by following the Aaron, rather than a cloud of the Shekinah. The Gentiles took this as a heavenly sign that God had abandoned the Jews, and that they would be favored if they now attacked the Jewish people. An ancient foe, Amalek, decided to take revenge upon the Jews. The Amalekite people well remembered the last battle against the Jews in which they were defeated because Moshe raised his hands in tefillah, as was explained at the end of Parshas Beshalach. The Amalekim therefore devised a plan to prevent the children of Israel from using of prayer. Their power collaborating with their neighbor Arad, king of Canaan, they borrowed Canaanite costumes, so as to come to battle in the guise of Canaanim. The Amalekim reasoned, "The Jews will mistake us for Canaanim and pray to God to destroy the Canaanim. Their prayers directed toward a different people will be ineffective." Upon seeing the enemy soldiers approach, the fright of the Jews was immense. They attempted to flee back to Egypt and retreated 7 stations. Prevented by the children of Levi from retreating further, they halted there and broke out in bitter crying and mourning for Aharon's death. They realized that this calamity had come upon them because of the absence of the tzaddik. Although the enemy soldiers were clad in typical Canaanite costumes, the children of Israel were uncertain as to their identity. If they were Canaanim, why did their faces resemble those of Amalekim? And why were they light-skinned like Amalekim, whereas the Canaanim, descendants of Ham, were dark-skinned? The Jews therefore decided to pray to the Almighty without specifying the enemy's name. They did teshuvah for their sins and vowed, "Hashem, if you will give this people, whichever nation it is, into our hands, we will not derive any benefit from their spoils, but destroy them." The Almighty, who is close to his people, accepted their teshuvah and tefillah and gave the children of Israel victory. In pursuit of the Amalekim, the Jews traversed again all the 7 stations they had previously retreated. They destroyed the enemies and their possessions. The Amalekim did not kill or injure a single Jew. As long as Moshe lived, no Jew ever fell in a battle commanded by Hashem. They only recaptured one maidservant from their own people, whom the children of Israel had previously captured from them. The clouds of glory were only briefly absent from the camp. The Almighty restored them to the people in Moshe's merit. Nekash Hanehoshet, the copper serpent that healed those stricken with snake bites. When the Jews had arrived at the boundary of Edom, they had hoped to cross this country and enter Eretz Yisrael immediately. Edom's refusal, necessitating another circuit and trip through the wilderness, was a blow for the children of Israel. They were tired of their long years of wandering and impatient to reach the land. The remaining men of the generation of the wilderness complained to Moshe, "Why have you taken us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? We were almost at the border of Eretz Yisrael, and now we must turn back into the desert. We have been wandering about for the last 38 years. We can bear it no longer." The people also foresaw the length and hardships of the future Edomite exile, and they were therefore depressed. "Again, we will have to subsist on the man which is an unnatural food. We are afraid that it will eventually burst our stomachs because it causes no excretion." The people's complaints were unfounded and regarded by Hashem as las honhara against the man. A heavenly voice proclaimed, "Listen, you ingrates. After all the kindnesses I performed for you, you are dissatisfied. I gave you a marvelous food, the man that is totally absorbed by the body, sparing you from the unpleasant necessity of leaving the camp to relieve yourselves. Your route around the land of Edom was also intended for your benefit, lest you suffer harm from the Edomim. Moreover, you will conquer the kingdoms of Sihon and Og." Hashem said, "Let the snake, whose food tastes like dust, but it does not, complain, punish those who complain about delectable food. God sent poisonous snakes to inflict fatal bites upon some of the complainers against the man. Others were fatally bitten by wild dogs and scorpions. The complainers realized that they had done wrong. Falling down before Moshe, they confessed, "We sinned when we spoke against Hashem and you. Pray to Hashem that he remove the serpents from us." Moshe immediately forgave them. If someone is asked to forgive another, he should do so, or else he is regarded cruel. He implored Hashem on behalf of the sinners. God instructed Moshe, "Fabricate a large serpent named Saraf." This poisonous serpent is called Saraf because its venom causes burning fever. Saraf is derived from the root W, to burn. Attach it to the top of a high pole so that it is visible from any point in the camp. A Jew who is bitten by a wild dog or a scorpion will be healed by glancing briefly at the Saraf, while one who received a snake bite must gaze at the Saraf intently in order to recover. Of course, neither a brief glance nor intense staring at the serpent could effect a cure. Rather, Hashem implied that a stricken person who directed his heart heavenward, looking at the Saraf with the proper thoughts of Teshuvah, would be cured. A Rasha would not recover by looking at the serpent. Why did Hashem bring about the recovery by means of a serpent? Its sight would arouse the consciousness of the evil of Lashon Hara. The serpent is a symbol of Lashon Hara because the first snake in Gan Eden slandered the Creator. Looking at the snake would therefore cause a sinner to do teshuvah. Hashem did not tell Moshe from what material to construct the Saraf. However, a wise man understands a mere hint. Moshe reasoned, "Hashem certainly wants me to make a serpent, resembling a living one." The body and neck of a serpent have a coppery appearance. Moreover, the very name Nakash, serpent, is related to nechoshes, copper. I will therefore make the Saraf from copper rather than from gold or silver. Moshe brought a pole, cast the Saraf into the air, and it miraculously landed and stayed on top of the pole. Hashem's word came true. Whoever did teshuvah and looked at the Saraf stayed alive. Moshe's copper serpent was preserved in the community of Yisrael for almost 700 years. It was known as the Nechushtan. Since it retained its healing power, it eventually came to be regarded as a sacred object, and, when idol worship spread, the Jews sinfully worshipped it. King Hizkiyahu, who purified the land of idol worship, finally crushed it, as is recounted in the book of Melachim 2:18-4. He crushed the copper serpent which Moshe had made, for until that time, his time, the children of Israel used to offer incense to it and knew it under the name Nekushtan. The great miracles at the river Arnon traveling along the eastern border of Edom and Moab, the countries which did not grant them passage, the children of Israel reached the territory of the Amorim. They encamped to the north of Moab, on a strip of Amorite land by the river Arnon. There the Almighty performed for them miracles which were as astounding as the miracle of splitting the Yam Suf. One who visits the valley of the river Arnon recites the blessing, "Blessed be he who wrought a miracle for the Jewish people in this place." The blessing was instituted following this episode, when they learned that the Jews were about to pass through the narrow valley of the Arnon River. The Amorim realized that they had an easy opportunity to exterminate the entire people. They therefore planned a surprise attack. Armies of Amorite soldiers went into ambush in the valley of Arnon, some concealing themselves in mountain caves on both sides above the valley, others in the valley itself. By suddenly hurling stones and missiles at the children of Israel from above while simultaneously attacking in the valley below, they hoped to create a fatal trap in the narrow valley, from which there would be no escape. The mountains on each side of the valley were so close to one another that someone standing on one side could easily speak to his friend on the other. As the children of Israel approached the valley, the mountains on the Amorite side, later part of Eretz Yisrael, began to tremble upon beholding the Aron of Hashem. Then they miraculously began to drift toward the mountains of Moab, as if hurrying to welcome the children of Israel. Hashem moved the two mountain ranges overhanging the valley until they smacked together. From the face of the Amorite mountains, jagged rocks protruded like breasts and horns, and they entered precisely into the caves and holes of the Moabite mountains. Thus the two mountain ranges crushed all the soldiers who were concealed in the caves and in the valley. Their blood colored the river Arnon, Meanwhile, the Jews traveled fully unaware of the death trap from which they had been miraculously delivered. God alone knows the miracles which he performs for his creatures. A poisonous snake may be hiding under a person's bed, but he is unaware of it. In the morning, as he is about to set foot upon the ground, the snake suddenly retreats and flees. He was spared from death but does not know of God's miracles. Therefore, the Pasuk says, "To him who alone does great wonders," Tehillim 136:5. "Only he knows of the great wonders he constantly performs for us," said the Almighty. "I want my children to know what a tremendous army I destroyed for them." Hashem caused the mountains to retreat to their original positions. Water from the well of Miriam streamed into the mountain caves, turning red from the blood and bringing out piles of limbs, which floated to the end of the camp. The waters also carried to the children of Israel the pearls and jewels of the Amorim, twice as much booty as they recovered at the Yam Suf. 2 lepers were following along outside the clouds of glory. When they sighted the piles of limbs and bloodied water, they informed the Jews inside. Only then did the people realize that Hashem had saved them from a holocaust. They sang a song of praise about the wonderful well of Miriam that had revealed the great miracle to them. This shira served also as the parting song for the well, for soon afterwards, at Moshe's death, the well was concealed. The children of Israel composed a shira only about the well of Miriam, but never about the man, because they had spoken Lashon Hara about it. Shiras Habeer, the song of praise for the well of Miriam. The introduction to this shira resembles that sung at the Yam Suf. Then Yisrael sang this song, 21:17. However, here Hashem's name is omitted from the introduction and from the entire shira, and so is Moshe's. Why was Moshe's name omitted? Moshe was punished with death for smiting the rock which was the well of Miriam. He was unable to sing a song of praise about the rock that had brought about his death decree, just as a person would not be able to sing an enthusiastic song of praise to his hangman. Why does Hashem's name not appear? A nobleman was invited to a wedding. He told the host, "I will take part, provided you invite my friend also. If not, I will not attend either." Similarly, in Moshe's honor, Hashem left out his name lest people assume that Moshe's name was not mentioned because Hashem was displeased with him. This song can be interpreted on a dual level. In its obvious sense, it refers to the well of Miriam. Figuratively, it praises the Torah, the spiritual well of living waters. The song of the well interpreted literally by "Rise up, O well," they sang to it. After every verse, the children of Israel sang the refrain, "Rise up, O well." What is the meaning of these words? 1. The children of Israel addressed the well singing, "Arise from the valley of Arnon, O well, and bring up what is there, the limbs of the slain Amorim," thus demonstrating God's great wonders. 2. The well did not give forth its waters whenever. Hashem was displeased with the community of Israel, as we will explain. If this occurred, the greatest people approached it and sang in prayer, "Arise, O well," entreating Hashem to provide water. This is the well which the princes dug. This means 1. The forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, recognized as princes by their contemporaries, laid the spiritual foundation for the well. If not for their great merits, it would not have sustained their descendants for 40 years in the wilderness. Praised be the Almighty who requites those who fear him. For each kindness that a person does for another, he reaps the fruits in this life, while the principal reward is reserved for Olam Haba. Abraham provided a little water for washing his guests' feet. In return, God granted the Jews a well for 40 years. Because Abraham seated his guests in the shade of his tree, God placed his children under the protection of clouds of glory. Since Abraham served the angels bread, God gave his descendants man for 40 years. Besides bread, Abraham offered his guests a variety of delicacies, butter, milk, and meat. Therefore, God caused the man to yield a variety of flavors according to each individual's desire. In return for Abraham serving his guests meat from several animals, God granted his descendants slav twice. 2. After the water welled up, each Nasi with his rod dug a line towards his tribe, along which the water began to flow. Then those in charge of the community drew brooks toward the individual families. The words, "This is the well which the princes dug," refer to the Nesiim's drawing lines to their tribes, which the nobles of the people dug out with their staves by order of the lawgiver Moshe. 1. This implies that the well of Miriam disappeared after her death, but the people's nobles, Moshe and Aharon, restored it at the waters of Meribah. 2. Although the well usually produced water wherever the children of Israel encamped, Hashem sometimes withheld its water because he was displeased with the people. Then the Talmidai Hakamim, the nobles and the little children who were free from sin, would approach the well and sing in prayer to the Almighty. Arise, O well, in the merit of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Arise, O well, in the merit of Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam. Thereupon its water began to flow. First it formed a stream between the tribes of Yehuda and Yissachar. Thereafter, the Nasi of each tribe drew a line to his territory with his rod. The water began to flow along these lines, marking the boundaries between the tribes, and from the wilderness was the well bestowed upon the Jews as a gift. In his great kindness, God supplied our people constantly with water in the dry desert land. Although the well accompanied the Jews in the merit of their forefathers and great leaders, it was nevertheless a free gift from the Almighty. When the Jews sinned in the incidents of the golden calf and the spies, and on other occasions, they forfeited their right to benefit from the merits of the forefathers. Nevertheless, the well continued to accompany them as a gift from the Almighty, because the Tzaddikim prayed that God grant the people water. And this gift was converted into rivulets as described above. The well branched out into form the boundaries between the tribes. Many rivulets that mountains. The well accompanied the Jews up to High Mountain, and from the mountains to the valley. It was concealed when the Jews arrived, in the field of Moab at the top of the height, where Moshe passed away. The well can be sighted from the front of the wilderness, for God placed it in the Sea of Tiberias. One who stands opposite it in the wilderness can discern in the midst of that sea a rock riddled with holes, similar to a sieve, that used to be the well of Miriam. The waters of the well of Miriam can heal from Zara'at. Once a leprous person immersed himself in the Sea of Tiberias. God caused the rock that used to be the well of Miriam to float toward him, so that he was immersed in its water. He was immediately healed. Every Motzai Shabbat, some of the waters of the well of Miriam are poured into all the wells. It is therefore customary for women to draw water after Shabbat ends. If Hashem lets the person find water from the well of Miriam, even if his entire body was covered with boils of leprosy, he is healed. Once a sick man's wife went to draw water after Shabbat, and came upon well water from the well of Miriam, filling her jar with it. When she returned, her husband shouted at her angrily because she had been gone for a long time. The jar fell from her shoulder, and some of its water was sprinkled upon her husband. Wherever the water touched his flesh, the leprosy disappeared. The old Beit HaMidrash near Tiberias was built by the sages with its mains entrance in the direction in which the sages estimated was the location of the well of Miriam. Thus, a person entering the Beit HaMidrash would face the direction of the well of Miriam. Remember how God provided the Jews with water in the wilderness, and fortify himself with trust in Hashem. The song of the well interpreted allegorically. The well also alluded to the spiritual wellspring, the Holy Torah, the source of all wisdom and success, as follows. This is the well which the princes dug. Our forefathers, the princes of the world, studied and observed the Torah even before it was given to our people at Har Sinai. Abraham observed even rabbinical ordinances, Yitzchak after the Akedah, and Yaakov studied Torah in Shaims and Ivers academies, which the nobles of the people dug out by order of its lawgiver, Moshe. The entire people received the Torah at Har Sinai through Moshe. The Torah transformed us into a nation of nobles, and from the wilderness, a gift. God granted us the gift of Torah in the wilderness, rather than in an inhabited land, among other reasons to teach that a Torah student who is humble, similar to a wilderness upon which everyone may step, is granted the knowledge of Torah as a gift. And from Matana to Nachliel. After Matan Torah, termed Matana, the Jews adopted idolatry, Nachliel Nachalu Avodah Zara, for they made a golden calf, and from Nachliel to Bamos. Because they adopted idolatry, death followed. Bamut is interpreted as Bamavet, death set, in. That generation was sentenced to death in the wilderness, and from Bamos to the valley. Thereafter, the tzaddik Moshe was told that he too would not enter the land, but he would pass away in the valley. The battle against Sihon. The Jews were now at the border of the Amorite country that was governed by the fearsome giant Sihon. Sihon was taller than a tower, and his armies were stronger than Pharaoh's. His name, Sihon, implies that everyone used to talk, Mesichin, about his enormous strength. Moshe gave Sihon an opportunity to avoid war, sending him the following message. Let us pass through your land. We will not step into your fields or vineyards, and we will pay for our drinking water. We will take the main road until we will have passed your boundaries. Sihon replied, I cannot consent. All neighboring nations pay me borders. Attacks because I permit no strange armies to cross the surrounding nations trusted in the mighty giants Sihon and Og to protect them against invaders. Og, king of the neighboring Bashan, was Sihon's brother. The two giants were known to be as strong as all the 31 kings of Canaan together. In reality, Hashem caused Sihon to harden his heart because the Amorim's measure of sins was full. Their wickedness had reached its peak. Therefore, heaven decreed that they be wiped out. Hashem inspired Sihon with the thought of gathering all his troops and leading them toward the desert in order to make victory easy for the Jews. Had Sihon barricaded himself in his well-fortified capital, Heshbon, and withdrawn his troops into fortified cities, it would have been a laborious process for the children of Israel to overcome the Amorim. Instead, Sihon and his army immediately fell into the hands of the children of Israel. Moshe personally slew King Sihon. Thereafter, it was easy for the Jews to take possession of the unprotected capital, Heshbon, and of the other cities, where only women and children were left. When conquering the Amorite cities, the children of Israel also gained thereby some Moabite territory ruled by the Amorim. For example, Heshbon had originally belonged to Moab. Sihon had made many unsuccessful attempts to wrest this city from the hands of Moab. Finally, he hired two famous sorcerers, Bilam and his father Beor, to curse Moab so that he would be able to conquer the city. The two sorcerers cursed Moab with the following poetic words. Come to Heshbon. It will be rebuilt and re-established under Sihon's name, for it will become his city. A fiery war will break out. Sihon's flame will destroy the kings of Moab and the priests who sacrifice to the deities of Arnon. Woe to you, Moab! You are lost, people of the god Chemosh. Your sons will become fugitives and your daughters captives of Sihon, king of the Amorim. We will dart arrows at them, until they will be destroyed from the city Heshbon until Divon. And we will lay them waste until the city Nophak that reaches Mitzvah. Subsequently, Sihon was able to conquer Heshbon. Hence, Bilam and his father were proclaimed powerful sorcerers whose curses were effective. In truth, Hashem gave parts of Moab into Sihon's hands for the sake of the community of Israel. At that time, the Jewish people had no permission to attack Moab directly, Devarim 2:5. Instead, God caused Sihon to subdue those parts of Moab which he wished the community of Israel to possess. The Torah narrates these events to demonstrate that the Almighty manipulates the history of entire nations for the sake of his people. The words of the Torah are true on many levels. According to the Midrash, the curse of the two magicians contains a profound moral. The tzaddikim, who have attained mastery over their evil inclinations, proclaim, live your lives with premeditation. Calculate the cost in money, time, or convenience of performing a mitzvah in relation to its eternal profit. If you are about to sin, weigh the gain of a transgression against the eternal loss it brings in the world to come. If you thus determine your way of life and individual actions, you will be successful, both in your present and future life. However, one who lives without self-control, solely to gratify his desires, like a young unbridled donkey which is called Mo, will be consumed with burning shame in the world to come, besides finding himself empty and frustrated in the present life. A flame will emanate from the tzaddikim, named sichim, bushes, since tzaddikim are likened to trees, and consume those who do not control their desires. Will also consume those who are arrogant, who claim that there is none on high pawn, and that there is no reckoning for one's good or bad deeds. For wait until the day of reckoning will come, and a fire will blaze that needs no blowtorch until their souls will expire. The battle against Og and the conquest of Bashan. At the end of Tishri, 2487, the children of Israel confronted another frightful enemy, Og, the king of Bashan. Angered by this nation that had slain Sihon and his armies, he mobilized his troops for battle. King Og was the last surviving remnant of the pre-Mabul giants. He was a tremendous, queer, and ugly-looking creature. Our sages relate that he consumed, for his meal, 1,000 oxen and drank 1,000 jugs of water, and that he built 60 cities, the least fortified of which was 60 mil high. His strength was reputed to be unsurpassed, except by one of his sons, who was even mightier than he. When Moshe heard that Og was ready to wage war, he was afraid. Our great teacher Moshe did not fear Og's physical strength. Moshe, more than anyone else, knew that before the Almighty all the nations are considered nothing. Moshe had therefore repeatedly warned the Jews not to be afraid of their enemies, and had reproved them when they confessed fear of the inhabitants of Canaan after the spies' report. What then did Moshe fear? He suspected that the Almighty might assist Og. Moshe reasoned, I am only 120 years old, while this man is over 500. The Almighty must have granted him long life for a good reason. Og informed our forefather Abraham that his nephew Lot was taken captive. Perhaps the merit of this mitzvah protects him. Moreover, Moshe feared that the children of Israel might have committed a sin in the war against the Amorim, such as having taken of their spoils. Unless the camp was pure of sin, Hashem would not assist the Jewish people further. Hashem assured Moshe, Do not be afraid. I have subdued Og's protecting angel and given Og into your hand. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorim. I did indeed reward him with long life for telling Abraham of Lot's captivity. Now, however, let me reveal to you the motives that prompted him to perform the mitzvah. They were evil. Attracted by Sarah's beauty, he wished to draw Abraham into battle, hoping that Abraham would fall, and he would be able to take Sarah. He will be punished for his evil thoughts by falling into your hands. You, personally, shall slay him. Moshe commanded the children of Israel to camp overnight near the city Edrei, where Og lived, and ready themselves for battle on the next day. Early in the morning, Moshe walked toward the wall that surrounded the city. It seemed to him much higher than it had been on the previous day. In reality, the giant Og was sitting on top of the wall, his feet dangling to the ground. What is this, wondered Moshe. Have they erected an additional wall on top of the old one during the night? No, Moshe, Hashem informed him. You see, Og himself, you shall now overcome him. Ready for action, Og planned to wipe out the entire Jewish people without even involving his army. He uprooted a tremendous rock, in fact, an entire mountain, saying, This rock is 3 parsaos long, equal to the area of the entire Israelite camp. I shall hurl it onto their camp and destroy all the Jews at once. Hashem foiled Og's plan by causing armies of ants to crawl upon the rock and gnaw at it until it became perforated. When Og attempted to hurl it at the Jews like a tremendous bomb, it crumbled in his uplifted hand and fell onto his neck and shoulders. As Og tried to remove it, it became firmly stuck to his neck. Meanwhile, Moshe, who was 10 amos high, seized an axe 10 amos long. He leaped 10 amos into the air, reaching Og's heel, which he smashed with the axe. The giant fell in the direction opposite the camp, so that the rock should not cause any harm, and died. Thereafter, the Jews killed Og's sons, defeated the enemy's army, and took possession of the territory of Bashan. According to Rashba, the confrontation between Moshe and Og was spiritual. Og knew that the Jewish camp was 3 parashot long, that the Jews derived their strength from the merit of their 3 forefathers. However, Og uprooted the mountain. He claimed that the merit of the mountain, Abraham, the forefathers are termed mountains, would assist him because he had performed the mitzvah of helping Abraham. The grasshoppers, according to another version, ants, namely the Jews, crumbled the rock. The Jews are symbolized by grasshoppers, which make a chirping sound to hint at their special power of prayer. Moshe was able to overcome Og with his merit and tefillah, figuratively described as his height, in the merit of the people, described as an axe, and in the merit of the forefathers, described as leaping, because he had to spring back hundreds of years. Moshe hit Og in the heel. He spiritually overcame the merit of Og, who ran with his heels to bring the news to Abraham. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that Og actually attempted to cast tremendous rocks at the Jews, and that God prevented him, for one must recite a special blessing upon seeing these gigantic rocks. Both Sihon and Og were foes more dangerous to the community of Israel than Pharaoh and his army. Their downfall merited a separate shira. Since, however, the Jews never composed a song concerning the destruction of these two enemies, David included the events in the psalm the Great Hallel, Tehillim 136 or 1:18-22. Give thanks to Hashem, for he is good, for his kindness endures forever. He slew mighty kings, for his kindness endures forever. Sihon, king of the Amorim, for his kindness endures forever, for his kindness endures forever. And Og, the king of Bashan, and gave their lands for a heritage, for his kindness endures forever. A heritage to Yisrael, his servant, for his kindness endures forever. Traveling further along the east side of the Jordan, the Jews approached the outskirts of Moab. When the Moabim heard of the arrival of the people that had defeated the mighty, King Sihon and Og and their armies dread befell them. They therefore summoned Bilam to curse the Jews, as told in the next Parsha. Thank you for joining this week's journey through the Midrash. If you enjoyed this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share this channel with someone. Please hit the like, share, and subscribe button for the next story. See you next week on the Midrash Says Out Loud.